Hey everyone, I'm Ashleigh Banfield and this is Drop Dead Serious. Ohio. There is so much that we don't know about these 16 children who were rescued from a squalor-filled home and 4 adults who were arrested and charged. Presumably their parents? Don't know. And grandparents? Probably, but don't know. So much has happened and there is so much incredible reporting. I just want to get you filled in on this. I don't know what else to say except that the Turpin case that we covered years ago is almost like child's play compared to this horror show in Hamden, Ohio, Vinton County. So if you watch my last episode, you would learn in that episode that on June 30th, 10 o'clock in the morning, sheriff's deputies responded to this home in Hamden, Ohio, for an unrelated warrant to what they were about to find. And what they discovered inside this home was a room 12 by 12 with 16 kids crammed into it in squalid conditions. So feces, filth. And again, 16 children in 12 by 12 means not enough room for everyone to lie down. How on earth were they living in there? Why were they in there? 4 adults were in the house, and they've all been charged. But let me go over the kids first. They ranged in age from the youngest, 20 months old, a set of twins, twin 20-month-old children in that condition. And then another set of twins, 4 years old. And then we'll climb up from there. So we're already at 4. So we'll climb up from there. A 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, an 18-year-old. Gary Siders Sr., 73 years old, presumably grandpa. But I'm only going to say presumably until I find out who really fathered all these kids. Christina Siders, 67, presumably grandma. Gary Siders Jr., 36 years old, presumably father. And Elizabeth Siders, 33, presumably mother. But like I said, this story's so batshit crazy, I'm not exactly sure if the youngest woman was the mother or if the 67-year-old grandmother might have been a mother. Not sure. And as for the 2 men in the house, I can't be certain that grandpa or dad were even the fathers of all these children. I just know that there's another set of twins that didn't make it. Conjoined twins that were born and died within a very short amount of time, just hours. And I'll be honest, I'm not so sure that's the only children. And by the way, I did an interview with Angenette Levy. She's the host of Crime Fix on Law&Crime. And the reason I called her was because she went there. Literally, she got in her car and she drove to this county, to this town. And she talked to all the locals. And you know that's where the details come from, right? Doesn't matter if there's a gag order. Locals are not bound by gag orders. Only officers of the court are. And so Angenette got some things. She got some information. Troubling, informative, certainly opened up a few more cans of worms. I'm going to talk to her in just a few moments. You're going to see that. I have a lot of information to give you in this podcast because NBC has done some amazing reporting on hospital records. So children who we know were born in hospitals, right? But for whatever reason, in a county where so many of these kids were born, those hospital records didn't seem to coincide with schooling records, right? Because these kids never went to school and there's no record of them being homeschooled. And that's not the way America works. If you are born in a hospital, schools know about you, counties know about you, and they have to keep track. Otherwise, shit like this happens. So some county folk have some explaining to do, to say the very least. A couple of other things. The Attorney General in Ohio, Andy Wilson, said this: pure evil, almost like feral animals, the way these children were living in that home. Quote, deplorable, horrendous, and disgusting. Quote, one or more of the children may have died had officers not responded to the home when they did. And can I remind you that officers only responded to this home on a warrant, not because someone called to say, this child's at risk of dying anytime soon. 2 kids were airlifted to hospitals. 1 was in critical. 7 were admitted to hospitals for checkups, okay? And again, not because anyone called to say, there's an emergency happening in this home, we need life flight. No, happenstance. Happenstance that an unrelated warrant was being served. And suddenly, here are all these children, some of them near death. So that's where we begin, okay? But there's so much more to it. The 18-year-old girl apparently couldn't even write her own name. Some of the children couldn't even speak. I don't know how they're going to even extract the forensic information that they need to get from these children, because these kids are witnesses. They know what happened in that home. They don't know the whole story. They may not even know who fathered them or who mothered them, for that matter. But they know some things, right? Because if the Turpin case told us anything, it's the children who really can tell the story. They are the witnesses to the horror, to the crimes. And when I say crimes, yeah, there were charges, okay, but we're not even at the tip of the iceberg. So each of the 4 adults who was in the home, they each face 16 counts of child endangering. So again, 4 adults, each of them facing a charge of child endangering. That's a second-degree felony. It carries 2 to 12. But let me tell you, if you watched my last episode, you will know from the detective who was at the helm of the Turpin case, the tip of the iceberg means there are many more charges likely to follow, because the kids will tell us things, right? You don't need to inflict physical pain to be charged with torture. But maybe these kids did have physical pain, because I'll bet many of them were hungry, starving, in fact. Some of them were incredibly skinny, according to witnesses. And in the Turpin case, one of the teenagers weighed as much, I think, as an 8-year-old. And that was torture. So watch this space, because I think the charges are about to be loaded up onto these people. But in the case of Elizabeth, the youngest, Elizabeth Siders is 33, her lawyer said she might be a victim. So yeah, there's some stories we need to learn. So let me go back to where the family's story begins. And again, the incredible reporting from NBC. In March of 2008, they found marriage records that show Elizabeth Siders was just 15 when she married 18-year-old Gary Siders Jr. The 2 were living on the same street in a county called Gallipolis. It's in Ohio. But the records show that this couple crossed the state line into Mason County, West Virginia, and got married at the courthouse there. Maybe at the time it was because the age of Elizabeth at 15 was just more amenable to marriage in another state. We do know that the parents signed off on all of this, and I think we know why. At the time, Elizabeth had just completed 8th grade, and Gary Jr. had just completed 9th grade. But 2 months after the marriage, 2 months after the wedding, Elizabeth gave birth to their first child, a daughter. And that happened in a hospital in Gallia County, Ohio. So sounds like a shotgun wedding. I mean, she was 2 months from giving birth, so 8-9 months pregnant. And she's 15. So there's trouble ahead. I mean, come on. What are the odds, right? The records show that Elizabeth moved into the Gallipolis home where Gary Jr. was living right after they got married. And then in August of 2009, Elizabeth gave birth to their second child, a daughter. And again, at Gallia County in a hospital there. And by then, the family had moved to a rural home about 15 miles north of Gallipolis. And according to birth records, they stayed at that address for roughly the next 7 years. So then between 2011 and 2016, Elizabeth gave birth to 5 more children. Daughters were born in March of 2011 and 2012, May of 2013, and May of 2016, and they had a son who was born in September of 2014. All 5 were born in Gallia County Hospital, and the home that the Siders were living in fell within the Gallia County local school district. So yeah, they've got some answering to do because they had the records. The hospital bore the children. The school should know where they are, or at least make an effort to find them if they move. But when the district was asked whether the Siders' children had ever attended school there or had been registered as homeschooled students, the officials very conveniently were able to say that they could not comment on individual education records. Oh, well, yeah, but you will have to. If this ends up in court, you're really going to have to. And methinks that this is such an incredible disaster of the state and of county officials, civic officials. They're going to have to explain themselves. There are 16 victims here, maybe more. Well, at least 2 more conjoined twins who are dead. And who knows why they might be dead. So yeah, state's got some explaining to do. And can I just break for a moment and ask you, since information is so scant on this case, and this gag order is not going to make it any easier, if you know anything about this, if you are connected in any way to the Siders or friends of the Siders or the places where they lived or the story itself, and you can be a first-person reporter of information, please reach out to us at dropdeadseriousinfo@gmail.com. Again, dropdeadseriousinfo@gmail.com. We can keep you anonymous, but it's remarkable how many people might be watching who actually might know something that maybe even the police don't know at this point. Dropdeadseriousinfo@gmail.com. Super helpful. Let's move to 2017. The family at this point appears to have started to be on the move again, according to NBC. And again, NBC did some amazing reporting here. Huge, huge credit to them. In January, Gary Jr. was cited for driving without a booster seat. Yeah, Britney Spears style. But again, I guess you got a lot of kids and maybe not enough seats in the car and maybe not enough booster seats, whatever it was. He pleaded guilty and he paid $165 in fines. And that traffic citation listed a new Gallipolis address. And then in October of that same year, Elizabeth gave birth to another daughter at Gallia County Hospital. So another hospital record. But her birth certificate for this little one listed yet another address, different from both the traffic citation and the family's earlier birth records. So now we're starting to move multiple times in a year. That address appears to fall within the Gallipolis City School District again, so what's their excuse? The district superintendent said there were no records connected to the Siders' children, although any records that did exist would be protected by student privacy laws. Okay, why are there no records? They had births in your county hospital. Don't you follow those things? Because in most other places in America, we do. I remember when I had children, I got the notice in the mail, coming up on registering for school. I mean, it's how we keep track of our most vulnerable. It's how you can't have babies as a business and just sell them or put them to work or torture them or abuse them without anybody knowing about them. In October of 2019, Elizabeth gave birth to yet another son at Gallia County Hospital. And that birth record listed yet another new address just outside Gallipolis. And then in September of 2020, she gave birth to another daughter, again at Gallia County Hospital. Wondering what those doctors and nurses were thinking at this point. Like, did they reach out to anybody to say, "Ooh, Houston, oh, there's something going on here"? Look, it's okay to have a lot of kids. There are people who do. But when they come in extraordinarily impoverished and filthy and maybe smelling, like lots of witnesses said, maybe you should ask a question. Maybe you should suggest social services have a sniff, take a peek. Because again, that's how this stuff happens when no one gives a damn or says a word. And there is a first line of defense. When a woman is coming in every single year since the age of 15 and having babies, Maybe you should ask some questions, or at least ask somebody in a position of authority to take a look. Could be nothing, could be something. So at this time, the family's address was listed in Cheshire, Ohio, right? This last birth, Cheshire, Ohio. That's about 7 miles up the Ohio River from Gallup Police. And then came 2022, and court records indicate that 2 of the 16 children later removed from the home were twins who were born in February of 2022. But NBC was only able to obtain a birth record for one of the twins. I don't get it either. A boy born at Gallia County Hospital. So I'm trying to do the math on this, and I'm wondering is it possible she had a baby, she still had a twin, but they released her from the hospital, and then she had the other baby at home? Because that would be malpractice. I can't for the life of me figure out how there's a birth record for one twin and not another. So again, hospital's got some explaining to do. So the address on that single twin's birth certificate raises some questions as well, because it was in Bloomer, Wisconsin. But property records describe that location as agricultural land with no residential structure. So again, there's a huge flag. But then in November of 2022, Elizabeth gave birth again, this time to conjoined twin girls. And since they were born, they got names: Faith Lee Siders and Bailey Lee Siders. They were born just 24 weeks gestation at a hospital in Columbus. And the birth and the death records for those conjoined twins show that both babies died of natural causes within an hour of being born. I mean, did she have any prenatal care? What were the circumstances for Elizabeth Siders, who seems to be having babies more than one a year? Their records listed the same Cheshire, Ohio address connected to the family in 2020. And then in January of 2024, Elizabeth gave birth to another set of twins, a boy and a girl, at a hospital in Athens County. Their birth records also listed the Cheshire address. 1 year later, January 2025, Elizabeth gave birth to yet another set of twins, twin boys, again at an Athens County hospital. But this time, the birth records listed a new family address, Ulmer Street in Hamden, Ohio, a tiny Vinton County community of about 700 people. Vinton County Schools said they had no enrollment. They had no homeschooling records connected to the Siders family or any of their children, although the officials said that they would not be able to disclose those records even if they did exist. And that brings us to 2026. Investigators say Gary Siders Jr. allegedly exposed himself on 4 separate dates in May to people outside of his household, but at the family's Ulmer Street home. So I don't know where your mind goes, but people who aren't one of the 16 kids or one of the 4 adults were at that home, and Gary decided to do whatever he did. So a warrant in that particular case was issued on June 30th, and that was the same day that police arrested Gary Jr., Elizabeth, Gary Sr., and Christina Siders, the grandma, or supposed grandma. But after tracing this family across nearly 2 decades, the biggest mystery may still be the one we know the least about. What exactly brought law enforcement to that house on June 30th? Officials have referred to a parallel investigation involving allegations of domestic abuse and child neglect, while other reports say officers were executing warrants connected to another case when they just happened upon the 16 kids in a 12 by 12 room in squalor, filth, excrement, and hell. So we would go to the search warrant to find out, right? But guess what? It's been sealed, and the Columbus Dispatch is now suing for access to those records, saying that proper law enforcement procedures may not have been followed here. And then there's Elizabeth Siders, the mom, maybe? I mean, I guess she's at least the mom of several of them. right? Because while she is charged right alongside the other three adults, her own attorney has publicly raised the possibility that Elizabeth, married at or forced into marriage or, allowed to marry at age 15 while 8 months pregnant, she may also be a victim here. There could be a hell of a story that comes with Elizabeth. I don't know. But there are a lot of whispers. Lawyer says the victim, his client, could be a victim. Doesn't say a victim of whom or of what. That has not been explained. But that question becomes even more significant when you look at the life that she appears to have lived, marrying Gary Siders at 15, giving birth 2 months later, and then having child after child almost every single year, sometimes 2 in 1 year, as the family just kept on moving around non-stop. Getting answers may now be even more difficult because the judge who's overseeing Gary Siders Jr.'s case has granted the defense a motion for a gag order, which means that the attorneys, law enforcement, court personnel, any public officials involved will be limited in what they can say publicly as this case moves forward. I have so many questions about that, but I'm only assuming that some of the allegations against Gary Siders Jr., whatever those allegations involved, may very well punish these kids if it became public. They may be the victims of him allegedly once again if this stuff becomes public. To understand what life around the Siders home may actually have looked like, Angenette Levy from Law&Crime picked up and went there herself. Angenette is a seasoned journalist and the host of Crime Fix on Law&Crime, and she spoke with neighbors. She spoke with local residents there. She talked to people who say they've encountered that family well before the arrests. One employee at a local Dollar General told Angenette the family would sometimes come into that store late at night and purchase seemingly random items and then carry with them an odor so noticeable that the employees remembered them. And another person who had been near the Siders property told Angenette that the strongest smell did not appear to be coming from the main part of the house. It appeared to be coming from the basement. So I don't know what was going on in the basement. We know, according to police, these children were jammed into a room that was 12 by 12, presumably at the back of the house, because there is what seems to be in an overhead view of that home, a 12 by 12 area. We don't know if that's the area, but it kind of matches the possibility. So what was the basement? Did they have plumbing? Or was the basement the plumbing? Is that why they moved constantly? What happened in the basement? So I had a lot of questions for Angenette, and boy, did she find out a lot more stuff. Here's my conversation with her. Angenette, it's so good to have you. Thank you so much for being on, especially since you did it. You just hit the road and you went to this little tiny place, Hamden, in Vinton County, to ask some questions, and you learned some things.
I did, Ashleigh, and thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you. I did learn a lot. I went out there to this area of Hamden. Hamden is a village of, I think, 700 people live there. Vinton County, 13,000 people live there. So this is the smallest, least populous county in the state of Ohio. And it's also kind of a poor county. But I must tell you, from the little bit I saw just going around town and everything, it's actually quite cute. What you're hearing about on the news and what you're seeing on YouTube and things of that nature. That house on Omer Street where the Siders lived, that is not typical in Hamden. It's actually a cute little town. And I talked to a lot of people out there. Some couldn't talk to me, but some would. And this is just stunning to people who live out there.
Well, can I just jump in for a second?
Yes,
because I am shocked to hear you say that that this house on Ulmer Street is an anomaly, because my assumptions upon hearing this was, oh my God, this must be in one of those places that is so depressed and so poor that this would seem the norm, and that's why it was overlooked. But I am astounded to hear that this is not the norm there, which makes this story even more egregious.
Right. And what we are talking about with the Siders home on Omer Street, there may be low income people in Hamden and in Vinton County, but this is like the extreme. This is like absolutely the extreme. When I was driving into town, I mean, I saw well-kept houses that were cute. I'm sure there are people who are low income there, but nobody lives like this that I could see, and of course I didn't go around doing home inspections. There were some rundown homes, of course, one of them being a home that the Siders had lived in prior to this home. So there were some rundown properties, but this was not typical. And even the house that was down the road, there's only 2 other structures on that street, on Omer Street. The one that you could call the next door neighbor, that's actually probably a lot or 2 down, separated by a bunch of brush. The people had their house kept up. While I was there, the husband was mowing the grass, on his riding mower and stuff like that.
Do you know if the houses that the Siders occupied prior to the house on Omer Street, are there residents living in those houses now? Because I wonder if they'd have some stories to tell about the condition they found the houses in.
Yeah, I went up into that house and I didn't see anybody home. There was mail on the front porch. Oh, and the mail had a different name than the Siders. But it's my understanding that Elizabeth, Gary Jr., and their children had lived in that home before they moved into the home on Omer Street, where Gary Sr. and Christina lived. So Gary and Christina lived in this Omer Street home, and then they were living on Main Street in this larger home, the Gary and Elizabeth and their brood. And then they moved into the Omer Street home at some point in time, and that house actually did look more run down. It looked like it was kind of falling apart in some respects. So if somebody lives there, I'm assuming it's a rental home, not somebody owning it and living there.
Let's face it, I cover some of the darkest crimes out there, but let me tell you, some of the scariest stuff is happening quietly right behind your screen. Your name, your phone number, your home address, it's all floating out there online, and it is not because you gave it away. It's because somebody sold it. Data brokers are tracking you. They know what you buy, what you search, what meds you take. They even know where your kids go to school. One phone call and suddenly you're wiring money to somebody who sounds exactly like your own child or your mom. This is pretty chilling stuff, but here's what most people don't know. You actually have the legal right to make your data brokers delete your info. Problem is, doing it yourself could take years, and that's why I use Incogni. Incogni does all that dirty work for me. They go straight to these companies and they demand that they remove my personal data. They even offer a custom plan, unlimited. You flag a site that's exposing your info and Incogni's privacy team goes after it directly. This is not just peace of mind, this is power. So if privacy matters to you, and it should, go to incogni.com/dropdeadserious and then use my code DROPDEAD, and I got you 60% off. You're welcome. Again, that's incogni.com/dropdead. Use the code DROPDEAD to start taking your data off the market today. It's not unusual for people to move in with the grandparents, especially in this day and age when people are trying to make ends meet. But do you have any idea if Gary and Christina, the seniors, were regularly part of the home with these children and the younger parents? And again, I'm not going to suggest that all of these kids are parented by the juniors. I don't know that. But do you think that the grandparents were regularly living with this family, or is that kind of a new addition that they finally ended up with the grandparents?
I think they've lived together before, because we've got some new information actually today about the case when the family lived in another county, and they lived in a town called Cheshire, and that home, that address had been associated with Gary Sr. and Christina at some point in time. It had also been associated with Elizabeth and Gary Jr. So I think they all did at times all live together. So I don't think that that's a brand new thing. You have to keep in mind that Elizabeth and Gary Jr. were married when she was just 15.
They were kids.
Went across the state line to West Virginia. She was pregnant. They got married when she was 15. He was 18. And then they had a baby a couple of months later after they were married. And then she turned 16 shortly thereafter that in August of 2008.
And then babies every year almost. It's just, it is so remarkable. And we've actually talked about that. And there's a gap every so often in which I smell a rat, but I don't know. But I did want to ask you about this moving around, because I know that you were able to ask some questions and you got some sources who gave you information about the Gallia County Children's Services, that they actually did have contact with this family. But do you know what that contact was and what they established?
Yeah, I don't know the exact contact. I had been told over a week ago that Children's Services in Gallia County had paid them a visit. And whether that was a home visit, whether somebody called, I don't know. The Children's Services people are not going to give us that information.
Sure. Yeah.
In the state of Ohio, it's called the Department of Job and Family Services. It's now there's a new department now called the Department of Youth and Children. It's gotten a new name, but they're not going to they're not going to say, yeah, we did visit. But I reached out to that agency in Gallia County, and my calls and emails were not returned by the director of that agency. But I heard that from somebody who would know, and then I was able to confirm it otherwise, that the Children's Services had paid them a visit or had some contact with them, and then they picked up and moved. And then we got further confirmation of that. Today, we got some documents from the juvenile court in Gallia County, and it showed that in October of 2021, truancy complaints were filed against Gary Jr. and Elizabeth because the children had not attended school. 6 of the children, the 6 oldest children. So the school district went to the juvenile court in October of 2021 and said, these kids haven't come to school once this school year. And so they're habitually truant. And so Gary Jr. and Elizabeth, you are in trouble. Excuse me. And that case was never pursued fully because they tried to serve Gary and Elizabeth with the paperwork, but were not able to find them. They went to try to serve the paperwork. Right. So that case was kind of terminated in January of 2022 because they couldn't find the family. And that kind of tracks, if you think about it, the timeline of the authorities saying that Gary and Elizabeth had lived in Vinton County for 4 years or so. She had a P.O. box, I found, that was actually registered to her in Vinton County in 2020. So that kind of tracks that timeline, that something happened around that time, and then they went from Gallia County up to the county to the north to Vinton and moved there.
Well, it makes you wonder if they were on the run because they knew trouble was afoot, or if they just were so itinerant that the law just couldn't find them, organically.
And maybe that's possible, that was their kind of the way they lived. Maybe that's their MO. They live in a certain place for a certain amount of time and then they move. But what I found interesting was the fact that these children, in order to be found habitually truant, they would have had to have been registered with the school.
Yeah.
So somebody at some point in time registered them for school,
and
then they never showed up.
To move 16 children, it's just not easy. Someone has to see something at some point. And yes, they're moving around, but they're moving around in kind of a small area. It just feels so wrong that there isn't a police report saying, watch out for a family of, because we suspect there's crimes being committed. The truancy thing, we can't complete it. It just feels as though everything went through the cracks.
Well, and this is not an area that you have to keep that in mind. This is not a it's not a highly populated area, and resources are somewhat strained. However, even the sheriff said, people might think we're too busy. Always call. But there was nobody to call back on Omer Street, at least, because I talked to a neighbor who had a bird's eye view of the house from his home. I mean, he told me, he said, I've lived here since the year 2000. I pull in here every day. I've never seen a child over at that house. And then I talked to the lady who lived next door, if you could call it that, the house down the street in the cul-de-sac, like by all the brush and all that stuff.
It's rural. Yeah, lots of space.
Yeah, it's
between homes.
rural.
Yeah.
But this is not a street that has all the lots full. So there's a big patch of brush kind of separating those two homes. And she said that she thought it was about 2 years ago. She saw 2 to 3 children playing in the yard, and they would, when she drove by, you drive by, you wave at the neighbors or whatever. She would drive by, and they would literally see her and run toward the house as if they were hiding. And I said, well, what did they look like? She said they were pretty skinny. She said they were skinny, and they would just run toward the house. But then she said, it's been a couple years since she's actually seen the children. She actually would see Gary Jr. sitting on the porch at times too, and she would wave at him, and he'd always wave back, very friendly. But she said it had also been a while since she had seen Gary Jr. Gary Sr. rather, sitting on the porch, and she actually thought that there was nobody living there anymore. She thought that the people had moved.
Just unbelievable. The weird thing is that you've learned that this family actually had a P.O. box, and that
Yes.
there was somebody repeatedly coming to collect the mail. What's the story there?
We don't know exactly the story behind the P.O. box, but people sometimes get P.O. boxes for different reasons. If you have a business, well, we're not sure they had any type of legitimate business, because look at how they were living. They were poor. They don't have any money, so we don't know what was going on there. But I was told when I was in town that the grandma, Christina, a lot of the times would go down to the post office to get the mail at the P.O. box. So they had that address, obviously, on Omer Street. We're likely getting mail there, but they would actually physically go down to the post office to get the mail there. And it sounds like, from what I was told by a man I spoke to about this, he said, the people at the post office didn't suspect anything.
That's unbelievable. But I am thinking, with all of the movement of Gary and Elizabeth, the juniors, the youngers, with all of the movement, there's no way that the mail could ever keep up with them. Not to suggest they needed mail or ever bothered to get any mail, but a post office box might make sense if they were moving around so much but needed something to receive official information.
Yeah, and if you don't want people to know where you are, you get a P.O. box. Also, I mean, if you think about it, we were told that the kids actually had phones. So
What?
Yeah,
the kids in the room 12 by 12?
Yes. The older children had social media accounts, and some of the older children actually had phones. So were their parents providing them with phones because they're like, well, we can keep you down here and you can stay busy and make some videos and do whatever. Maybe that's how they entertained these children, since they weren't going to school, things of that nature. So
social media, I mean, the 18-year-old can't spell her name. Some of the kids can't speak. And now we're talking about they're able to operate a phone, and they can get on the internet, or they can get cellular service, and they can get outside the home, at least digitally.
Yes, apparently. The older children. So I don't know. Yeah, it's confounding, because it's like you don't have enough money to properly. It sounds like you didn't have enough money to properly feed your children. You're going to a diaper bank in town to get supplies. You're going to the Dollar General. I was told over the weekend too, by an employee, they would come in typically at night, and they would buy random stuff, just random stuff. And they used, a benefits card,
Okay.
EBT, I guess is what it's called here. I don't know what it's called in other places, but it's basically food stamps.
Got it.
And that's how they would pay for items, is with that.
But did
And
they tell you anything else? I mean, it's one thing to notice, okay, here's some people who come in at night and they use the food stamp card, but how would they even remember who these folks were? Like, what stood out?
they smelled badly.
Really?
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things. When I was at the Dollar General, I was like, oh my gosh, this place is hopping. Like it was
Busy.
I went to 2 different Dollar Generals. I couldn't believe how like crowded they were. I mean, because I think it's like the closest place in town to go. There's one in the town heading into town, into Hamden, and then there's one right there in the middle of Hamden. There's a Dollar General. And both of them, it was like a steady stream of traffic through there. But I think the fact that they came in later at night, they had a distinct odor to them, which I hate to say that, but it's the truth. That's what people said. Some of the Dollar General people wouldn't talk. They had
I'll tell you what.
clearly been told to stop talking.
I would guess so. But also, if you are operating, if you're working in a Dollar General and it's a busy one, it is hard to remember all the folks who come through there. So there had to be something very specific, and a smell would definitely remind you of who these folks were if you see them once or twice or more than that. So I get it. But nothing about kids?
They would see younger children occasionally, not often, but occasionally.
What about the neighbor who noticed a smell coming from the basement? What was the story behind that?
Well, that was just somebody I spoke to while I was out there. This is kind of another interesting part of this story, things that have developed and evolved since this story broke. While I was out there, I went out there thinking, I'm going to be the only person out there. Nobody else is going to be there. But I kept seeing cars coming down the street while I'm out there, and I'm like, who's coming down here? There's not a lot of people that live down in this area and the road around the corner. And there was kind of a steady stream of people, looky-loos, just people who were curious coming down the road. And some of them lived pretty far away. I met a couple who said that they probably lived like an hour or more from where we were located there in Hamden. And they said, well, we just came out and did some mushroom hunting, and then we went to MacArthur and had, some pizza, and we thought, well, we're in the area, we'll come look. We saw it on the news, and I was like, really? And I
Crime tourism. Angenette, we've covered it. Crime tourism. Remember the Laundry's house? It was like crime tourism central. People hear the news and they flock to it.
Right. And I think that there's some of that going on, but I think it's because people simply they just kept saying, I don't understand how this could happen.
How could it happen?
How 16 children could be in a home and nobody would know it. So there was there were 2 ladies, they were friends that I met. They lived 2 hours away, but they were kind of 45 minutes away. They were visiting a festival that was going on. And they just said, we had to just come. We were in the area. We had to come see it. And this is not well traveled. So you have to be going there to get there.
It's a destination.
They just had to see it and kind of look at it and just think to themselves, what happened? And then while I was out there, I spoke to somebody who kind of had gotten probably closer than they should have. And they said, I smelled something really a smell coming from the basement. So were the children being kept in the basement, or was it just stuff down there that just the smell was collecting and things like that? I mean, it's unbelievable.
Well, my mind goes to a million places about the basement and about the smell. I saw an overlay that one media outlet had done of the vertical view of the house, and there was one room in the back that was 12 by 12. And that media outlet pondered, well, could this be the place where the children were? Mm-hmm. But I didn't think about the basement as being the prison where the kids are being kept. I actually thought maybe the basement was the sewage system. I mean, who knows if they had enough money, or if they never paid sewer and water, or if they just used the basement. I mean, or God forbid there's anything more sinister in the basement. And I just wonder about the gaps in the years where there aren't children. Are there dead children?
Well, we know that there are a set of twins who died.
The conjoined twins.
Yeah, in 2022, November of 2022. The other gaps, I don't know.
'Cause there's no hospital records for those gaps, right? And yet you have kid, twins, 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 you know?
Well, we do have birth certificates. We have birth certificates showing that the children were born in hospitals, delivered.
But don't you just wonder, well, were there some who weren't born in hospitals?
I mean, it's certainly possible, or a miscarriage, maybe, a pregnancy with a miscarriage, but just the back-to-back nature of this, just baby, pregnant, and it just kind of makes you wonder, like, I kind of keep wondering, is there some religious component to this? What was going on?
Well, you start at 15, so not a lot of education to start with, 8th grade, and he's got 9th grade, and who knows about these parents, these grandparents.
I must say, though, Ashleigh, if I may interject, if you see photos of Gary Sr. and Christina just in the last few years, there are photographs of them even within the last 2 years where they appear clean. They don't appear to look anything like what we saw in their mugshots. Like they're dressed, they look clean, they look healthier. So
I mean, those mugshots look straight out of Deliverance.
yeah, that's pretty bad.
Yeah.
And
So you're saying that
Gary Senior is undergoing a competency evaluation. I mean, he's in the hospital being treated for a serious medical condition.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, are you suggesting that in the last few years there might have been an extraordinary decline in these older parents?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. But at the same time, I mean, it appears they've lived at least together in the same area together for quite some time, for many years. But they did look healthier. Like if you do a side by side of Gary Sr. and Christina from about 2023, 2024, these Facebook photos that we see, and then you look at them in the mugshots, it's like, what happened?
All
like,
different.
has somebody been like locking you away? I mean, like, I don't know. It makes me wonder what happened, because how do you let your parents fall into that condition? It doesn't make any sense. I think we have so many more questions right now, Ashleigh, than we do answers.
It's interesting that you would say, how do you let your parents fall into, because my mind was going to, these crimes have been allegedly committed against these children for the last 2 decades. You know, these aren't fresh crimes. And I sort of wondered how much of this might have fallen on the seniors, you know, how much of it might have been directed by the seniors. Is there any talk, any rumor mill, any discussion about what the seniors, what part they might be playing in all of this?
No, I mean, there's been some discussion that Christina, grandma, there's been some talk that she may have been homeschooling the children. But if you're going to homeschool children, you can't
You
just
register.
say, I'm homeschooling children. You have to actually
It's official.
let the state know that
Yeah.
you're homeschooling, and you have to turn in, records
Records.
and things like that. Supporting that. You can't just say, well, the kids are staying home with me and I'm going to teach them. That's not how it works.
It's supposed to be the way we protect children from exactly this happening. Records are kept. You're not allowed to just keep your kids home and not tell anyone about it. You know, we live in a country that has laws, and you have to abide by them, period. And that's just one of them. You've got to register your kids. You can school them at home, but you can't do it in secret.
No, and that's 100% true. And really, how much schooling was going on? I mean,
18-year-old can't write her name.
well, that's what they say. She's at least
Some of the
able
kids
to
can't speak.
do something on Facebook. Yeah, I mean, I would like to know more about the actual condition of the kids, because the way they were described when they went in there, I mean, the AG said they were almost feral. I mean, that you go in and you see these kids, and he likened it to one of those old commercials from when we were younger, where it was like you had the starving children in Africa and they wanted you to donate money, and these poor kids are like just sad, and like, so were these kids, are they are they truly nonverbal, or is it like they were so stunned and not well cared for that they're just like
Or terrified.
freaked out and like, oh my God, who are these people with
Yep.
guns coming in my house?
They
Like,
could have been terrified. They could have been told growing up that the police are the enemy and,
yeah.
don't ever say a word. So many things could have happened. But I think back to the Turpin case and how those children were the witnesses. They told the story because in that home, there are only the members of that family who saw and know what went on. And so if the children can be forensically interviewed, if they can speak, if they are verbal, I hope they will. I
Yeah.
hope they will say everything and not be too afraid. And God forbid that the state fuck up again and put them into even more dangerous circumstances like happened with the Turpin kids.
I hope with the microscope that's on this case and the fact that the state controlling board yesterday authorized sending $1 million down to the Children's
Yeah.
Services Agency down there, that there will be great care that they won't be placed with people who are going to endanger them, because you don't need to go from bad
To worse.
bad and worse or whatever.
Angenette, we can, you know what? Love that you are so optimistic, but I thought the same with the Turpin kids because the microscope couldn't have been more severe, and yet it did happen. An entire new set of crimes happened, an entire new prosecution and prison sentence happened based on horrifying crimes that were worse after they got out of their torture chamber with their parents.
Oh God, really? Oh,
Yes,
that's
yes.
horrible.
We just
Well,
interviewed the detective in the case, and he said, here I was, a detective in the original case with those parents, and I was a detective again in the second case with the foster parents who abused them even worse.
that's just horrific. I mean, that's kind of like I'm wondering about the screening. Like that terrifies me.
Yeah,
That
think.
frightens me.
I know. And the Child Protective Services, like, come on, if there's any case you have to focus on, it's the one where they're already torture victims, right? They're torture victims. Literally, the charge was torture. They were placed in another home. You would think the visits would be weekly, maybe daily.
Yeah, I don't have faith that the visits will be weekly and daily.
No.
I mean, I hope so. I hope that they're putting in some safeguards for these children. I mean, there should be safeguards for all children, but these children in particular have gone through a lot. I mean, let's just hope like the little ones, the smallest ones,
Yeah.
are
Be the most resilient,
put in a good
hopefully.
situation and maybe don't remember this, because the youngest set of twins is a year and a half old. So
And then the next setup is what, 4? There's so little.
yeah.
But speaking of family and relatives, etc., there was a relative who weighed in on this case and said that all of this might be exaggerated. Do not speak to me about exaggeration when 2 kids are life flighted. One, apparently, according to officials, NBC learned that that child might have died had that child not been taken out when that child was taken out. 7 of them were admitted to hospitals. 2 are in critical condition. So I don't want anybody to tell me that anything's exaggerated, because I ain't ever seen anything this bad. But this relative said maybe it was exaggerated and blamed it on a couple of things like poverty and education. Like, what was the story with that relative?
Well, I spoke, when I say spoke, we exchanged messages to this relative, and she's related to Christina, the grandma, somehow. But again, I mean, I don't believe she's had contact with Gary Jr. and Elizabeth for some time,
Okay.
many years. But I think she's actually a very nice person. She has a background and seems very knowledgeable about trauma and things like that. But I think that that's her hope. I think the hope is that this has been exaggerated, because Ashleigh, I think there are some people who just can't wrap their minds around something like this. And there have been other relatives who've posted things saying that Gary Sr. and Christina, who goes by Lynn, that they've been in their house and they didn't live like this. They didn't raise their children like this. Their house was clean and things like that. So
Now I can't wrap my head
off.
around it. You
Yeah.
know, saying that I now cannot. I couldn't wrap my head around it before, but you saying that they had some normalcy to them according to, witnesses who'd been in their home. Now I'm just completely confounded.
Yeah, and I don't think they were referring specifically to this home,
Right.
but in years past. So again, I think we have more questions than answers now. Like what was going on with that family dynamic that Gary Senior rather and Christina were allowing, or maybe not allowing, maybe just feeling obligated to let them all live with them, or did they want them living with them? Were they like, this is our big brood of kids?
Or were they directing it, or were they abusing? I mean, I have so many questions. And speaking of that, Elizabeth, the mother, alleged mother at this point, she's certainly the mother of many of them. Her lawyer says, I don't even know yet if my client is a victim. I'm trying to figure out if my client's a victim here. Any idea what he's referring to when he says that?
Well, I think he's wondering, as we all are, did she marry into this family? And was she herself, in some respect, being abused? I mean, Ashleigh, would you spend like 18 years of your life pregnant back to back? I mean, would
No,
you do that? Like,
I was underwater with two babies. I'm not going to lie, but so I see that. But it's not illegal to be married and having babies.
No.
I just wonder if there's something else more sinister that they're suggesting.
Well, I think because people are wondering, like, how would you allow yourself to just keep having baby after baby after baby after baby? And was this something that was forced upon her, or is this what she wanted? I mean, her lawyer said something interesting, and I've been chasing her lawyer all over for almost 2 weeks now, and now there's this silly gag order, so I'm sure he won't talk, but I know he won't talk if there's a gag order. But he told Chris Cuomo, I believe it was Chris Cuomo, it might have been somebody else, asked him about why all these kids, or how did she react, and he said she was always open or wanted a big family. He doesn't know if she was open to having as many children as she had. So was this forced upon her? Who knows? Like, she left an abusive home when she was a teenager. Her one brother said that he and Elizabeth were both beaten. Their other brother was not. This is his claim. And that, they would both kind of run away sometimes. She met Gary Jr. They were all living in the same trailer park. Gets pregnant. Did she see this as her way out?
Well, her parents signed off on this marriage because at 15 they needed to.
Right. So was she saying, this is my way out. I'm going to have a baby, and I met this great guy, and this is my way out. I mean, is that a piece of this puzzle? Because a lot of times, women, I don't know if it happens anymore, but women sometimes would get pregnant to get out of bad home lives.
Sure, but did she ever think a decade and a half later I'll have had 18?
I don't know. So has she been kind of brainwashed into a way of life? Because she certainly looks a lot different than she does in photos that we've seen of her from the past, where she had the blonde hair. She's a cute girl.
Yeah.
Now she's got this kind of long, dark hair. I've wondered, kind of, is she dyeing her hair? Is that even her real hair color? She's obviously not going to a salon or anything like that.
Maybe the blonde was the dyeing job, and now it's just, this is the only thing that she can afford is just natural hair, and it's dark. But all of it is, there's so much to this story yet to still come out, including the reason that police came to the house in the first place and accidentally happened upon these 16 victims. What do we know about this warrant?
Well, I've been told it's not the public indecency. It's not that issue that
Where he
Gary
flashed,
has.
apparently Gary Jr. flashed himself in front of 4 separate occasions, people who were not members of that family inside the home.
Yeah, it said at the home. So was it outside? Was it
Said
inside?
Good
I mean,
point.
who on earth would go in that house, from what we've seen on the internet? But yeah, they went there, investigate. They won't say what it is, but they went there looking for evidence of a crime. It was not related to the children. And so they go in there to execute this search warrant, and this is what they find. I mean, the public indecency charges just happened to be filed against Gary on that same date, although the incidents happened the last week of May. It was like 4 separate incidents. And so they won't even give us information about that. I've requested the reports about that. I've requested whether or not police had been called to that home before. I mean, they're giving us nothing. And it's very frustrating.
So, Angenette, NBC reported that officials referred to a parallel investigation involving allegations of domestic abuse and child neglect. But then other media outlets said officers were executing warrants connected to a whole other case when they discovered the 16 kids, because everyone's trying to figure out what brought you to the house if it wasn't
Right.
that horror show, and you keep saying it's unrelated. What's the truth about all of that?
Well, we've been told that it's been called a parallel investigation, that a search warrant about something else brought them to the home. They've never said this is about, the children specifically or anything else. And when they've been asked about that, they said we can't go into specifics. So if it was about child abuse and neglect, why not just come out and say it and say we executed a search warrant because we had information that children were in danger, and that's not what they've said.
Which is shocking, because you've got the attorney general saying all sorts of stuff, right? Like pure evil, they look like feral animals, deplorable, horrendous, disgusting conditions. One of the children may have died had officers not responded to the home when they did. I mean, the attorney general is very, very forthcoming with details. But something as simple as what took you to the home is a state secret.
Yes, they won't say. And I should say the Attorney General Andy Wilson, he was an elected county prosecutor for years and years. He was the prosecutor in Clark County, Ohio, and then went on into the governor's administration and was just recently appointed Attorney General. So he's kind of finishing out this term as Attorney General. But he said he's been in lots of houses over the years, been to many crime scenes during his time as a prosecutor, and he's never seen anything like this. But they won't elaborate on that initial investigation, on what actually the search warrant was for and what they were looking for.
I thought the Turpin case would be the worst case in my career, and here come the Siders, which is just, again, I can't wrap my head around it. But the Columbus Dispatch is suing to get access to these warrant records, basically saying, look, there could be something untowards regarding the way this is being investigated. And all I can say is, with the way that the state has performed in terms of how these kids were completely forgotten and lost and then victimized, I think they have a point. Now the state needs to be under the microscope, not just these 4 adults.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what's been going on. I mean, and I've actually reached out to the state agencies, because there's no way, you can't tell me that this family wasn't getting some type of public benefits, like whether it's health care, food stamps.
They were using them in the store, dollar store.
And the prosecutor said last week during a news conference that he was only aware of Gary Sr. and Christina receiving benefits. At that time, he wasn't aware of whether the other two, Gary Jr. and Elizabeth, were receiving them. But how is that even possible? I mean, you're going into a hospital year after year after year giving birth to babies. You would think you would be on,
Someone's radar.
Getting health insurance through, Medicaid or what have you, and getting some type of food stamps. I mean, how is it even possible that you wouldn't be?
How are you feeding? I mean, obviously they're not feeding them very much if they were so skinny, according to the witnesses, but how are you even feeding 20 people in that home if you're that impoverished and you're not getting food stamps for every single child that you had?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Well, I hope we're going to get a lot more answers, because it's confounding that this can happen to this degree. Angenette, you're amazing for having gone and done all that reporting. Just like ace reporter, excellent details. And I think it's just the tip of the iceberg.
I think you're right. And I think we will eventually find out. They're just they're doing a very good job at keeping a lid on what this initial investigation was about. And I mean, it makes you wonder, like, what on earth could be going on in that home that would bring them there like that? Because who would go in that house? Like,
we'll find out soon enough. We'll find out soon enough. Either there was a trial and we'll get the details, or there might be a plea and we better bloody well get the details, because again, the state's under the microscope too. It's not just those four, it's everybody else in that county and in that state who should have done better for these children.
A lot of people should have done better for these children.
Amen to that. Thank you, Angenette. Thank you for this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So there you have it. Whoa. Great reporting by Angenette Levy. Again, Crime Fix on Law and Crime. But let me tell you what I think might be happening right around now. I think those children, in the most delicate and scientific way possible, are being interviewed by child forensics experts to try to extract statements, witness information, forensic information, anything they can about the conditions they were living in and what they saw. Because that's truly where so much of this evidence is going to come from, right? The detective in the case of the Turpins told us that the children say something, we go back to the house and we find what it is they're talking about. And so we know it's true. And so I feel like that's what's happening now, because the early interviews and intervention is so important. You don't want to implant any of these thoughts. And that's why the experts are so good at this many times. I really hope they're good in this case. But I think not only are they going to be doing those interviews with the kids to find out what happened, but also DNA testing them. Who's your daddy? Who's really your daddy? I mean, look, they could all have been fathered by the younger Siders, right? They could have. Gary Siders Jr. at all of 36 could have had 18 kids. 2 of them are dead. 16 were taken from the home. Gary Siders Sr., I don't know. Could he have? Could that be part of this? It's been that way before. I've covered too many crimes like that before. What about others? Maybe others. I have no idea. But I think that DNA testing on all those kids is probably happening now, because that's what the prosecutors are going to want to know. Who's the daddy? Who's the mom? Who are the parties responsible? Because again, tip of the iceberg with the 16 charges each that they're facing of child endangerment. It's the least of their worries. Gary Siders Jr. is the dad listed on at least several of the birth certificates, but you can say anything at a hospital. They don't DNA test you there. You can just say who's the father. The DNA tests will be definitive, and I am more than certain that that's happening. We're going to continue to watch this and update you with... I am obsessed with this story. I really am. And we'll give you updates when we learn. It's going to be tricky with the gag order, but with Angenette and her reporting skills, NBC, and then there's always the phone. We're going to dig up a lot more information on what the hell was going on in Hamden, Ohio. In the meantime, if you know anything about this case, if you have information, please drop us a line. dropdeadseriousinfo@gmail.com. We can keep you completely anonymous, but it would be extraordinary if we could find out information from you, and you have inside information, you know this family, you know the circumstances, you have some tangential connection as a first person reporter on things associated with this story. Even if you knew these people once back in the day, or you saw them, or you lived in the same area. dropdeadseriousinfo@gmail.com. Please reach out to us. Let us know what you know. We'd so appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And remember, the truth isn't just serious. It's drop dead serious.